and welcome. My name is Renee. You are tuned in to Embodied Astrology, and I am here on Monday, August 19th, to offer a reading and a season ahead overview for Virgo season. Virgo season starts in a couple of days on August 22nd. It lasts through September 22nd this year. And I'm offering the reading today on the day of the full moon in Aquarius. We're still in Leo season. The full moon was at 27 degrees of Aquarius, and it's the evening now where I am. And the light of Aquarius is rising. And I just checked the real-time chart, and the rising degree is 27 degrees. So as I offer this reading, opening myself to channel what wants to come through me this evening for you, wherever you may be in space and time in the future. I hope that what comes through will serve all of us in our healing, in our well-being, and in the ways that we are in service to the collective healing and well-being across all space, time, and for all beings. If you're just tuning in with me for the first time, I take an approach to astrology that is both somatic and analytical. I try to read through the lens of intuition, specifically embodied intuition or clairsentience. I like to use graphics. I'll be sharing a chart, and I'll also be sharing a drawing of a map I made to help guide me for this reading, and also for the Virgo season ahead horoscopes, which I recorded the other day. And for those of you who are interested in a personal read on Virgo season and suggestions for how to be with this season's influences for your sun, moon, and rising signs, you can find those horoscopes wherever you have found this video or this audio podcast, whatever format you're getting it in. You can find the Embodied Astrology horoscopes on the podcast streaming platforms of your preference, as well as on YouTube, and perhaps we're on other channels too. I kind of forget. Okay, so where do I want to begin? I think I want to begin just by calling in the light where I am. Again, I mentioned it is Leo season and it's sunset here. So Aquarius is on the eastern horizon. I'm situated in the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island, otherwise known as the United States of America. I am on the occupied homelands of many, many tribes and bands who have made their homes here since time immemorial. Significantly, one tribe who has been here for a long time and continues to be here, Chinook Nation, is right now calling for support for federal recognition for their tribal status. They have not had federal recognition for the last 20 years, and that has resulted in an enormous loss of employment and education opportunities, as well as loss of lives, lack of resources, etc. And so I'm going to drop a link in the show notes to sign a petition to urge elected officials to federally recognize tribal status for Chinook Nation. And along with that, I'll say that the reading that I give for astrology comes through my body, my perspective at this time. So take what works for you, leave the rest. Always feel free to make the meaning that's most meaningful for you. Secondly, I'll introduce some of the inspirations for tonight's reading. I'm holding the Owl of Athena. Maybe you can see if you're watching the video. So this owl is here to guide me, hopefully with wisdom and discernment for tonight's reading. I also have on my desk this magic wand. It is a cherry tree branch, or a piece of a branch from a cherry tree that this morning in Somatic Space, which is a weekly class that I teach, we had wand play practice. So it was our last Leo season session, And I'll be getting into some of the astrology that inspired the class, but basically the theme was harness your magic, and we had a little bit of wand play. And so I'm going to keep my wand here with me and also call in support for the magic of manifestation, for futures that are truly abundant, generative and regenerative, deeply generous for all life here on planet Earth. And I'll also say that for those of you who are interested in playing with astrology and really tuning in with astro influences through our bodies and through the felt sense, through experimentation and kind of experiential noticing, every week on Mondays from 8 to 9:30 a.m. Pacific on Zoom, I offer a live class called Somatic Space. You can always get the recording if you can't attend live. And those classes have been really fun, but they've also been incredibly transformative for me personally. And I hear this from the folks who have been coming, and many people have been really consistent in the class since it started. And as we have moved through the last year and a half of this class being a pretty much weekly event, what I've noticed is a huge amount of integration and transformation in my body-mind and capacity to work with life's ups and downs, or what I might think of as the astral weather. Because, someday the moon's in a sign and you feel a kind of way. But it can come out of the blue. It can feel, like it does. Feelings, they come and go. But working with astrology is a really wonderful way to give context to these ups and downs. And the astral weather very predictably prophesies the sensations of what's happening in our lives, personally and collectively. However, we all have our own reads, and as you'll hear in this episode, I have my own interpretations and opinions about what the astrological symbols might mean. And it's totally different to work with them on your own terms. And that's really what I hope to do in Somatic Space. And one of the core values of Embodied Astrology is to make this language something that we can all access through our lived experience and felt sense. And to do the work of decolonizing astrology, astrology in particular, Western astrology or tropical astrology, which is what I've been raised with and have studied pretty much my whole life and continue to be very devoted to. But this also is a practice, like many practices, that has been colonized and that has come through a lens of Anglophone intelligence, at least where I am in the United States, through a European lens, and definitely through a lens that has upheld patriarchy and white supremacy, as astrology has been integrated and reintegrated into systems of power, at least for the last couple hundred and 1,000 years. It has been used in many, many ways. And over the last century or so, some of the ways that it has been used has also been to commodify our wellness and to speak to us in terms of self-growth and personal awareness without linking our personal experience and the experience of our bodies into larger frameworks of collective unfolding and consciousness of histories that are both outside a Northern Hemisphere or Western framework and also untold within those frameworks. So at Embodied Astrology, we do our best to uplift queer perspectives, trans perspectives, perspectives of Black, Indigenous, and astrologers of color, and the perspectives of participants. You don't need to be totally well-versed in astrology to totally get it. Astrology is happening all the time, and it's happening through our bodies, our minds, our lives. And when we can grasp the basic framework of it, we can help expand and inform the vocabulary that it makes available. So I'd love to see you sometime at Embodied Astrology. If that sounds interesting to you, you can find more information about what we offer in the show notes, and I'll be talking a little bit more about some of our upcoming events throughout this episode. The last thing I'm going to say before I get into the astrology is a little bit of a divination that I did before this reading tonight. I used an oracle deck called Dirt Gems. Love this deck. Really beautiful offering by Anne Louise Burdett and Chelsea Granger. Really gorgeous illustrations, really beautiful and powerful descriptions. I asked the deck for herbal support, plant ally support for Virgo season, which we're headed into, and 2 cards wanted to inform the reading. So I'm going to introduce these cards, and that will be a good way for me to transition into the astrology. The first card that I pulled is the Arnica card. Arnica is a favorite of mine. I don't know if you've ever happened to have had the occasion to use Arnica. I've used it quite a lot for injuries, bruises, and whatnot. And I'm just going to read from their book. So Arnica is called the sustainer of form. Arnica is a guardian for our physical bodies and spirit. Arnica is the spider and the web. Reinforcing and supporting our energetic and physiological networks, Arnica aids healing and repair after injury. Arnica is a true ally in the face of shock and disassociation. This plant ally allows for integration after an experience of trauma, whether old, recent, or cumulative. Shock and trauma can become trapped in the body in many different organ systems. This stuck trauma can lead to a huge range of physical and emotional imbalances. For those who have suffered injury, abuse, surgery, bruising of the body, and or soul, Arnica is your friend. Pollution, low nutrient foods, and lifestyles are less physically active or engaged with the natural world have created a new set of challenges for humans. We have more layers and blocks to healing than ever before. Fractured from ourselves as organisms and animals, we exist in the world of our intellect, which does not aid our integration as a species into our greater ecology. Just as Arnica improves blood flow to inflamed and damaged tissues, helps move cellular waste out of the body and build new cells, they rebuild the flow and connection in the traumatized spirit so that new trust and development of the soul can occur. Arnica is an aid for the impact of physical injury, but also the tension and conflict of our times. Arnica allows you to repair and recover, rebuilds with strength and greater resilience for your next encounter with distress or trauma. You are training your tissues and your spirit in how to fight, flee, release, and regenerate. Arnica is the net. Arnica is the form. So you might know that Virgo is an earth sign, and it is what is considered to be mutable earth that moves or earth that changes. And one of the ways that I love to think of Virgo the most is as the intelligence of the earth forming and reforming itself. And in particular, the intelligence of the earth to grow and to heal, to mend and to repair. It is always so incredible to me to spend time in the living world. My body is part of the living world, and to feel the intelligence of cellular consciousness, organic intelligence. We live at a time where artificial intelligence is colonizing some spaces and making itself known as a presence. And organic intelligence also has been here forever and will continue to be I would say, supreme intelligence here on planet Earth. This is the intelligence of the living, breathing Earth. So I love that Arnica came through as an ally for this reading. Of course, it is such an important time to be doing healing work. In Virgo season, any year, it's a time to attend to our bodies, to help ourselves make preparations, work with our habits, our patterns, our lifestyles, care for our environments and our physical and corporeal experiences in ways that serve regeneration and healing and greater well-being and balance. And I love the way that in the description for this card, they were really talking about injuries that are both physical and of the soul or the spirit. We are alive at a time when injury resounds through consciousness here on Earth. The injury of ongoing violence, the injuries of separation from each other, from our experience or connection with land and with Earth, separation between our minds, hearts, and bodies. And all of those separations are enormous wounds. And I believe that we are here for a reason. And I think that if you found your way to this podcast or this transmission, then you too might align with the feeling that I have, that I am here for healing. And that might look a million different ways. But right now, especially, it is a time for healing. And it is a time to really devote ourselves to the labor of healing. So I welcome Arnica into this reading. And I also want to say that Arnica might be a good ally for you throughout Virgo season. You can use Arnica in both topical and internal forms. Always consult your medical providers for any contraindications. But check it out. If that sounded like medicine that you need right now, and you don't know about Arnica, you might want to learn a little bit more about it. Now, the second card that I drew is Ginger. And so I love that Ginger came after Arnica, because though we are in an earth sign season, for the majority of Virgo season, the planetary ruler of Virgo, Mercury, is actually in Leo. And as we move into Virgo season, Mercury is retrograde in Leo. At the end of August, Mercury will station direct and will remain in Leo through the first week into the second week of September. And whenever we're considering the general state or the influence of a zodiac sign, we want to tune in with the planetary emissary of that sign. Rulership is a word that I'm trying to replace in my language, and I don't always have it. So Mercury is associated with Virgo as one of its homes. It has an earthly home and an airy home. It's considered to be the ruler of both Virgo and Gemini. So as we'll talk about in a little bit, as we get into the astrology, there's a large amount of stuff that's happening in both of those signs. And so what's going on with Mercury is super important astrologically. Being in a fire sign, Mercury is bringing some heat, and so is Ginger. Just flashed you Arnica. Ginger. All right, so again, I'll read from the Dirt Gems deck. Ginger's name that they gave it in this deck is Steamy Pony. Ginger sizzles. Ginger brings the blaze in a releasing, dispersing, laying clean sort of way. Ginger wrings you out and leaves you soft. A deobstruent, I'm not sure if I said that right. I think it means to unobstruct. Deobstruent. Ginger brings their fire to face the obstructions and barriers to our greatest potential. Ginger tells your blocks to stand down. Ginger is fiery, yet has a relationship to water, to moisture, to the oceanic tissues of our bodies, and knows how to eloquently guide this conversation to a fulfilling conclusion. Let's work together, Ginger's fire says to our water. Ginger will strip down the layers of cold and collected debris that makes the work of our bodies and spirits fetid and slow. Ginger will let your name shine clearly on the skies of your desires. When you're visited by Ginger, you know Ginger does not hold back. Ginger is a loosener, a lightning agent, a bright force in the landscape of our momentum. Ginger helps us move forward by bringing down inflammation in our resource-consuming tissues, ideas, and relationships. If Ginger were a stallion, they would ride and ride. Ginger is a heat and humidity-loving plant that shows us what it means to be unafraid to stand tall, unapologetically, to let the heat in and breathe out flames of who we truly are. Ginger says, I am here and I like it. As a potent sexual ally, steamy, sticky Ginger says, come forward, come to me. With their heat, they encourage us to sizzle and warm, melt, and move our energies and desires. A friend of passion and an ally in building sexual energy, Ginger circulates life force through the body, the atmosphere, and the big hot world. So Virgo also in our bodies governs the intestines, your bodily capacity to absorb, assimilate, and digest, to make use of the information that you draw in, whether that is physical information that you consume or intellectual information that comes in through your sense organs, information that comes in through the mini gates that the body is connected through to the outer world. And currently, there are some influences that I'll also get to. I'm going to name right now Saturn in Pisces that can definitely produce stagnation in the watery parts of the body. So just as the ginger description was talking about in their guidebook, this is an amazing ally to help move stagnation, to help digestion flow. It is considered to be a warming herb, which is different than a heating herb. Things like chilies are heating. So if you eat a hot pepper, it can increase inflammation in your body. Ginger does not increase inflammation, and it still warms your body. So it helps toxins to move out of the body without producing acidity or inflammation. And I think that ginger is also an amazing ally for Virgo season in general, especially those of us living in the Northern Hemisphere as we move into the transition from summer into autumn. And I'm not sure, I haven't ever lived in the Southern Hemisphere. If you're a listener from the Southern Hemisphere and you want to let me know how it is there, I'd be very curious to hear. My experience as a lifelong Northern Hemisphere resident has been that at Virgo season time, I often find that my digestion gets a little bit weird. The mutable seasons do a thing in my body. I kind of never know what I want to eat as the seasons change. And ginger continues to be an ally at this time of year. As it also produces a kind of erotic charge in the body and moves sexual energy and creative energy, it is connecting us to what we might consider to be some of the Leo-ruled parts of our experiences, to the feeling of joy and romance and sex in a way that it can be fun and generative and creative. So if any of those things sound like something you want to bring in for your Virgo season, you might also consider calling in ginger as your ally for the next couple of weeks. Okay. Let's begin our reading. So I'm going to share a chart, and I like to use the chart of astro.com. It is a free website, and if you're into astrology, you might enjoy it. So here we have the chart of the solar ingress into Virgo. And as the sun moves into Virgo, where I'm going to be, it will have just also emerged from its underground journey. So Virgo season, if you happen to be on Pacific Standard Time on the left coast, Virgo season begins right around dawn on August 22nd. Beyond that, I'm just going to say for anyone who's following the chart with me, I will mostly not be talking about the houses. So wherever you happen to be, the astro.com site can help you clue into where Virgo is rising in your particular locale as Virgo season begins. But because we're probably all in different places, then I'm just going to speak to what I see in terms of planets, signs, and aspects, and let any conversation about the houses rest for now. All right, so tuning in with this Virgo season chart, as the sun moves into Virgo, Virgo's planetary ruler or emissary, Mercury, is in Leo. And you can see this little R down here means that Mercury is retrograde. So just a couple of days before Virgo season begins, on Sunday, August 18th, which was yesterday for me, Mercury made its inferior conjunction to the Sun. And this is an event that has one of the best astrological names. It's called a cazimi. A cazimi is translated as being in the heart of the Sun. And this is a period of time when Mercury is closest to Earth. It's between Earth and Sun. And from our perspective, Mercury is moving in a direction that is the opposite of its normal direction, that it moves most of the year. Mercury retrogrades more than any other planet, about 3 times a year. And at the inferior conjunction, or cazimi, we lose sight of Mercury entirely. And Mercury is traveling exactly with the Sun from our perspective. So this brings a kind of profound sense of inner consciousness as we move into Virgo season. Mercury represents the capacity, again, to make sense of information. And as the ruler of both Virgo and Gemini, again, an earth and an air sign, Mercury helps us absorb, assimilate, digest, and make use of information that is physical and also mental, that is earthly and also of air. And so here, Mercury in Leo is transiting through a sign that governs our hearts and our spines. And if you tune in right now in your own body mind and you try and bring your consciousness into the incredible organ of life and vitality that is your beating heart, you might notice that your heart is situated between your lungs and it is protected in the back by your spine. Mercury is again associated with Gemini, and Gemini, as a zodiacal principle in the body, governs the breath. And so as we move into Virgo season, there is what feels like to me a fresh breath coming into the heart. And the way that I would describe this is as information coming into our consciousness and shifting our sentiment. And the sentiment that we feel is a self-identified sentiment. It is the feeling of being a person, right? A me, myself, and I kind of idea. All the fire signs are associated with the actualizing self or the individuated self. And Leo holds the element of fixed fire and really represents in a very powerful and concrete way the actualizing ego. And so Mercury here in its inferior conjunction, in its retrograde conjunction, has just received the radiance of the Leo sun just a couple days before Virgo season. And there's a feeling here of consciousness spreading into the body with a new kind of breath. You'll also see this little symbol between Mercury and the sun that looks to me like a little like one of those little portable fireplaces or something. I'm forgetting what they're called right now. This is the symbol for Vesta, and Vesta is associated with the hearth, with the fireplace in its most sacred symbolism. So the fire at the center of the home, or the fire at the center of the community, that which keeps the fire going is associated with Vesta. The devotion and attendance to the life force is associated with Vesta. So I feel that this Virgo season is really on a fundamental level asking us to attune with our life force, and it is proposing some ways that we might shift and adapt in our consciousness. And our consciousness is wanting to move into our physical bodies, into our material worlds, and shape change in some ways. So consciousness, ideas, intellect, our thoughts, shapes matter. We create what we can imagine. And what we can imagine is profoundly shaped by what others can imagine, by the stories that we tell, by the information that we give and receive with one another and that moves through exchange. So many of our thoughts and reasonings and logics are inherited. They're adapted from what we have picked up from others. And as we move into Virgo season, there is a profound movement in collective consciousness, and each of us as individuals is being moved in turn. Now, what we do with that movement is going to be up to us, but the sensation that I have is that change is very present. Opportunities for change are very present, and motivation to change is growing as we head into the season. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this particular configuration right here has to do with Virgo being, again, a sign of mutable earth and earthly intelligence. Earth knows quite well when something is out of balance. When bacterial overgrowth happens, Earth ends up coming in at some point. When there's a proliferation of something somewhere, that proliferation will be brought into balance at some point. Now, human beings have our own concepts of appropriate timing, and Earth's timing is very different than ours. Earth is 4.5 billion years old right now and is believed to be about halfway through its life cycle. So maybe Earth will live to about 9 billion years before, either the fire at the center of Earth loses its heat, or the sun expands so much as to completely consume Earth. Lots of ways planets might die, just like human beings. But who knows if we're going to be here at that point? I highly doubt it. Human beings are about 250 million years old in our evolution. And I don't know about you, I can barely remember what has happened in the last 2.5 weeks. Definitely the last 25 years seems like a blur. Probably most of us have some kind of grasp on maybe the last 250 years of our history, maybe a very broad and general idea of the last 2,500 years of certain parts of the world's history. What has happened in the last 250 million years is pretty much beyond any human being's consciousness, no matter how much they might know about earth science or something like that, planetary science. Really, a lot of what humans think that we know is some form of speculation and storytelling. So I want to just bring in the awareness of time passing and Earth changing as we head into Virgo season. We are living at a time when climate change is accelerating rapidly in ways that are breaking previous models of climate prediction. As Octavia Butler and others have noted time and time again, change is happening concurrently across many vectors, and everywhere is changing at the same time. And so it is very hard to predict right now how change will be shaped over the coming season, over the coming years and decades, etc. But Virgo is a sign of earthly intelligence. And as Earth knows how to adjust its own imbalances, so do we in our body minds. But knowing how to adjust our own imbalances requires sensitivity, discernment, and practicality, as well as responsibility. So you might know, oh, I gotta, cut down on eating sugar, or I need to adjust this particular habit. You might know that in your body, mind in a conscious way because you can feel it. I'm going to just go out on a limb and say that most people, I believe, have some kind of inner sense of what they probably need. But the capacity to believe, to listen, and to act on that inner sense is not something that our society really supports in our development or modeling. And rather, we have a lot of modeling for ignoring the messages of the body, for enforcing and oppressing certain kinds of behavior upon our bodies and upon bodies of others. And there are all kinds of very real consequences for deviating from the status quo of disassociation and bodily ignorance. And some of those consequences over time have included violence, punishment, separation from loved ones, incarceration, being called crazy, all kinds of things, right? So listening to our bodies is a radical act, and taking action on what we know in terms of our corporeal somatic intelligence. And I would say that that what I'm referring to has to do with deep truth inside the body. And this is not the same as ego truth. It's not what we can conceive of in our minds and make stories about and justify and, come up with all kinds of logic around. Our bodily intelligence is very immediate in a lot of ways. Human beings know instinctually when something is to be feared or when harm is being done. Now, how we respond to what we know instinctually has been very manipulated by all kinds of factors. And so cultivating practices of deep listening, intuition, and discernment in terms of our corporeal intelligence is, I would say, necessary for an evolutionary path for humankind that is not only sustainable, but is joyful and can really contribute to what I think many of us imagine some kind of generative and joyful potential here on planet Earth might be. Additionally, the practicality, discernment, and responsibility piece is really important. So listening to our bodies requires our minds to help us make sense of what is happening with our bodies. Our minds, if they are not trained, will tell us all kinds of stories, and those stories will invariably be linked to our ego survival. So for example, if you feel something that is not pleasurable in your body, let's say it kind of hurts a little bit, if you don't investigate, if you don't pause for some critical thinking, your mind will most likely take over the sensation that you're experiencing and start to tell you all kinds of scary stories about what it is. And if you're not careful, then you in your identity might believe your mind and then react to what you're perceiving. And let's say that what you're experiencing in your body is not dangerous or harmful. It's, let's say, just a sensation. You might react in a way that actually then causes harm or creates an imbalance because you didn't take the time to discern what was causing the sensation. And again, we live in a society that rewards reactivity, that is entertained by ongoing violence, and that puts some of the most reactive, trigger-happy kinds of people in positions of power, and does not teach us skillful discernment and intelligence when it comes to working with our own consciousness. So moving into Virgo season, I am noting the opposition between Virgo and Pisces. And in this opposition, we are also tuning in with the relationship between the earth plane, the changing earth of our bodies, and the water element and the water that changes in our bodies. And water in astrology is connected to the emotional experience. From a bodily perspective, Pisces might be related to the endocrine system, particularly to the pineal gland, and parts of our endocrine system that really respond to the pineal gland and to the imaginative substance that we produce and consume. Endocrine has a very powerful reaction in our bodies, or our bodies have a very powerful reaction to endocrine. One drop of the chemical that your endocrine glands produce can totally change your body state. So just a little bit of cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your bloodstream can tell your mind that there's a threat. Just a little bit of serotonin and dopamine in your bloodstream can tell your mind that you're in love. These chemicals are not necessarily telling our minds are not necessarily telling the correct story about what these chemical messengers are trying to alert us to. And again, our egos like to click in and make up all kinds of fantasies about what we're experiencing. So in the relationship between Virgo and Pisces, as we will experience over the course of Virgo season, especially as we move towards the Pisces full moon on September 17th, we really want to practice the curiosity of discernment towards our sensations and experiences of sensation as they move through our body minds. That includes physical sensation, emotional sensation, and mental sensation. Any amount of ability that you have to regulate yourself in your body mind enough to take a little step back and ask, what's happening? What am I feeling? Can produce at least a little bit more of skillful response. So over the course of Virgo season, I definitely would love to encourage myself and anybody else listening to take the cue of the Virgo Pisces axis and also of Mercury retrograde, that this is a period of time to move with care, with discernment, and with the discipline of response ability. And to be disciplined, we might also want to pick up on some keywords for both Vesta and Virgo. Devotion. What are we commitments to in our lives and in our living forms? How we feel ourselves embodying that which we are committed to has everything to do with how we keep it in our consciousness and make choices over the course of our day-to-day, minute by minute, hour by hour, week by week. Are we practicing embodying our commitments, walking our talk, etc.? If I know that I want to be a commitment to healing in the world, then one thing that I definitely have to be is committed to harm reduction. None of us, as long as we're living in bodies that move with the force of gravity, that have to consume living matter in order to sustain ourselves, and that probably are hooked into systems of oppression, none of us can actually do no harm, but we can seek to do less harm. We can seek to not make it as bad. And so any amount of pause, skillful discernment, and working with the Mercury retrograde, RE prefix, refine, reflect, can help us through this time. All right, so here in the Virgo Pisces axis, you will see, along with the sun, we also have Venus in Virgo. and Venus is opposing Saturn. Saturn is co-present in Pisces with Neptune. Both Saturn and Neptune are currently retrograde. Today, the day of the full moon in Aquarius, again, August 19th, is the day that Venus perfects its opposition to Saturn. And on the day that Virgo season begins, I believe, on Thursday, Venus will perfect its square to Mars in Gemini. And you can see that Saturn is also square to Mars in Gemini and exactly square with Jupiter in Gemini. So Virgo season also begins with a mutable T-square opposition between Venus and Saturn, both squaring Mars and Jupiter in Gemini. So continuing with the idea of discernment and responsibility. Saturn has been moving through Pisces for the last 2 years or so. Saturn will continue to make its way through Pisces over the course of 2025, next year beginning to transition into Aries. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. And so one way of thinking about Saturn's transit through Pisces is the point of a 29-year completion since its last cycle began at the first degree of Aries. And some other ways to think about Saturn in Pisces is as form. Saturn represents form and that which has come into matter, dissolving. And Pisces is a sign of dissolution and dissolve. It is a substance that brings us back to the source, and the source is chaos. The source is the unknown. The source is the organized chaos of existence, where on the molecular level, information is breaking down all the time, forming and reforming, regenerating into new and different mutations of the evolutionary potential. And Saturn in Pisces is also an opportunity for us to bring form to change, bring form to dissolving what has maybe become habitual inside of the consciousness of the Piscean body, in our imaginations, in our sensitivities, in the ways that we are connected to ourselves and to one another and to others across time and space, emotionally and psychically and empathically. And Saturn here receiving an opposition from Venus in Virgo, to me feels like an invitation as we move into Virgo season to really apply ourselves to the work of healing justice. And this is the work of actually contributing to the dissolve of systems that will produce and perpetuate notions of separation and individualism. Pisces is not a substance that recognizes separation and individualism. This is all up in the mix. This is getting lost in the sauce in Pisces. And Saturn here is reminding us that our forms are completely interconnected and interpermeating with our environments, and our environments are completely connected and interpermeating with life across time and space. And so this place of evolutionary mutation, otherwise known as the realm of life on Earth, is a realm that is a dream-like space. And in this realm, one fantasy, and I would say a dominant fantasy for this time, is the fantasy of separate individualism, the idea that someone could get somewhere by themselves and not with the support of everything that they've ever eaten, or all of the places that have built their body, or all of the many, many beings that have contributed to anything that they have to bring with them. In opposition to Venus in Virgo, we have a practice of love that is practical. So Venus in Virgo can do away with the fluff and nonsense of sentimental romanticism. Venus in Virgo says, it's your actions that I'm looking at. I don't care about your words. It doesn't matter to me what kind of outfit you have on or how many followers you have on social media. I'm impressed by the substance of your character and your capacity to enact and embody your ideals. Venus in Virgo as a form of love is a devotional form of love, and one that is entirely committed to acts of service. And in opposition to Saturn, I want to say that this is an amazing time for all of us to be in service to what we love, and in particular, to connect ourselves in love with the earth plane itself and with the intelligence of earth as we might resonate with it through the realms of Virgo. For me, I find incredible resource and support, especially in times when I feel angry, hopeless, freaked out, and overwhelmed. I find nourishment from being with earth. And there's so much grief there because earth is being profoundly harmed by human beings. And I continue to find nourishment and support with earth, just spending a little bit of time noticing how leaves grow in these kind of fractal forms with one another, or watching birds move through the realm of air, or being with water and the consciousness of water, to me feels like a return to organic intelligence, natural intelligence. And when we connect in with the love that is present here on earth, and earth is the substance of our bodies are part of earth. When we connect in with that intelligence, I think that it's incredibly motivating and supportive for the struggles of our times, especially the struggles to stay awake, to stay engaged, and to lend our efforts and actions towards a greater collective calling. So here we see this T-square to Mars and Jupiter in Gemini. Today, the day of the Aquarius full moon, Mars and Jupiter, Saturn and Jupiter perfected a square with one another. A couple of days ago, last week, Mars made its square to Saturn. And I think that aspect was particularly tense and volatile feeling. And now, as it's a separating aspect, this square between Jupiter and Saturn feels in some ways like a kind of longer term and deeper pulse. So Jupiter and Saturn are really important figures astrologically. Many astrologers will refer to them as the chronocrators or the timekeepers. Respectively, they have orbital periods that are really significant in human lives. Jupiter takes 12 years to orbit the sun, while Saturn takes about 29 years. The outer planets, for contrast, Pluto, for example, takes about 250 years, or Neptune, 165 years. Uranus, 84 years to move around the sun. So some of us might have the opportunity to live to a Uranus return when it would come back to the same sign it was in when we were born. But none of us will live through a Pluto return or a Neptune return. God is willing. Most of us might live through a Jupiter return. So every 12 years, Jupiter will come back to the sign it was when you were born. You might get to live through a couple of Saturn returns. People get their Saturn return at about 30 and then 60 years old. And maybe if you make it to your Uranus return, you'll get a third Saturn return at about 90. But yeah, after that, I don't know, maybe in the future we'll live much longer, but for the time being, 3 Saturn returns seems to be the most that anybody might hope for. So Jupiter and Saturn are considered to be the timekeepers, and they have a really interesting dance with one another. due to their synodic cycles, that's the relationship that they have in their orbits around the sun, and of course, also from the Earth's perspective, every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn align and form what's called a conjunction. So they conjoin, they're at the same place in the sky. The most recent conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that we got to experience was in 2020 in December. So that was about 4 years ago. We will not have another great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn for another 16 years or so. So where they are right now as we head into Virgo season is at a very particular place in their dance. And this is called the opening square. Jupiter, traveling faster than Saturn, has now made it to a place where it is considered to be 4 tropical zodiac signs away from Saturn. Again, from our perspective here on Earth, this is a 90-degree angle or a square. And this aspect is connected with the first quarter of the lunation cycle. When you look up in the sky and the moon looks like half a pizza, this is that time. When it comes to planetary aspects. So the symbolism of an opening square, many astrologers will talk about as a crisis of consciousness. This is a decision point. This is a point when action needs to happen. Think back to 2020. What was going on for you then? I know that you know what was going on in a larger collective sense. I know that you were also there in 2020 as the world shut down in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in response to that pandemic, the fracturing and breakage of social support systems that happened in many places. Of course, the worst effects falling upon the bodies and communities that are most oppressed and most marginalized. These repercussions then rippled out into a time of great uprising and resistance to police and state violence. And this was a big theme in December of 2020. Was a worldwide response to the killing of George Floyd, which also instigated and reinstigated consciousness of police brutality and state violence, particularly against Black people all over the world, and systems of anti-Blackness and white delusion, the delusion of white supremacy, that have really informed structural violence for the last several centuries. So as you think back to 2020 and what was happening at that time, I encourage you to also think about what was happening for you in response to the larger collective environment. I don't think that anyone went through that time unaffected by it on some level. Psychologically, emotionally, physically, economically, there were so many repercussions of that. So many things were happening around that time, and certainly more than what I just named, but those were 2 enormous factors of 2020. Now, over the last 4 years, the pandemic has not ended. There's still a lot of contagion. The effects of long COVID have yet to be meaningfully addressed. There are still massive amounts of state-sponsored lynchings and killings. And we're actually watching the state violence apparatus through police and military and the prison industrial complex grow over the last 4 years. So there was a call in 2020 to defund the police. Personally, I don't love the name. I think it freaks a lot of people out. The intelligence of that movement was not reflected in the name. The intelligence of the movement was to shift the economic resource and the state support away from systems of violence and incarceration and oppression and towards systems of healing. to resource emergency response workers and first responders, to resource social care networks, to resource mental health providers, to resource basic needs, housing, food assistance, education, etc. These are the causes of violence. I believe the human consciousness sure has capacity to be violent. We all have limbic systems. We're all capable of the fight response. And our biological intelligence will fight when it's activated. Again, it's important for us to be able to discern around our activation. Lots of studies with cops, right, around this kind of lightning fast reactivity that many cops have been entrained with around Black bodies, and that just the sight of a Black person might, instill a sense of heightened caution in a police officer that seeing a white body would not do. And that's actually the same for police officers of color. This is part of training, right? It's part of racial profiling that goes into police training. And beyond that, it's fed to us in media, right? There's hundreds of years now of scapegoating particular kinds of bodies and painting images in collective consciousness of who is dangerous and who is safe. And these images given to us by the media do not reflect reality. The police state is modeled on slave catchers, right? In the era of legal enslavement in the United States, there were bands of white men who were paid to catch and trap enslaved people who had fled and run away for their freedom. And these slave catchers then were incorporated over time to become the police apparatus. And the police state, at least in the United States, and the military state and the prison industrial complex are all braided together very tightly. And in the last 4 years, rather than moving money from these systems that not only harm Black people or people of color, but continue to institute violence within our culture on so many different levels, and continue to meaningfully to not meaningfully address the actual needs that we have for reducing violence. Over the last 4 years, these systems have continued to be funded exorbitantly. And here in 2024, we are living through a time of mass, multiple coinciding genocides as the police apparatus continues to strengthen in the United States. I think there are like 80 cop cities that have sprung up since 2020 all over the United States. These are training facilities for police officers where many of them, from what I have heard, have kind of replicas of urban environments or environments that are modeled after areas that have been blighted by social malfunction and systemic abuse. And police officers are trained in combat that is war combat. And these police officers are trained in collaboration with the Israeli Defense Forces. The funding that goes to the IDF is also going to cop cities. And here we are at the opening square, Jupiter square to Saturn. And this square is occurring as Virgo season is starting and the Democratic National Convention is underway. In 1968, there was a Democratic National Convention also in Chicago that was very pivotal and powerful at the time in terms of collective consciousness and political activism. And this year we have, in some ways, a really kind of similar situation. Just as an aside, it's the Chiron return of the 1968 DNC. Chiron was also in Aries during that time. Anyway, I digress. So here we are at the opening square, and we're living through a period of time that astrologers call a crisis of consciousness. Something needs to be put into action. Consciousness was seeded in 2020. Jupiter and Saturn came together at the first degree of Aquarius, where you see Pluto now. Something was seeded at that point. And now 4 years later, consciousness has been building around what was sparked then in a large collective way. And now something has to give. Action needs to be taken. So this square will occur 3 times over the next several months due to planetary retrograde. We have the present square while Saturn is retrograde. Later this year, December 24th, the eve of Christmas, if that's a holiday that you celebrate or are aware of, we'll have the second square. At that point, Jupiter will be retrograde and Saturn will be direct. And then in June of 2025, both Saturn and Jupiter will have made their way into the next signs that they're going to be transiting. So Jupiter will be at the first degree of Cancer and Saturn will be at the first degree of Aries. And that is when they will complete this particular dance of the opening square. So the push for change and the crisis of consciousness and the need to take action around what has been growing inside of collective consciousness over the last 4 years will continue now as a kind of experience in the collective atmosphere and something that we can contribute to and participate with through June of 2025. So what this means for any of us is that the ways that we have been affected and moved over the last 4 years in response to the greater collective condition and environmental situation, now we are being invited to take action from how we've been moved. So if you've made it to this point in my reading and you're still here, then I'm just going to assume that you and I are somewhat on the same page. And I'm going to say that over the last 4 years, I have been deeply and profoundly moved. And I've been moved both by injustice and a kind of sense of outrage. And I've also been moved by care. I've also been moved by a deep desire and a growing emphatic feeling of certainty that it is possible for us to care for one another better than we are right now. And that feeling of care has also moved me, as I think it has moved so many people in the collective, to learn and study and share information. Again, air element, consciousness changing, information being passed, as to where this revolutionary energy or evolutionary energy can find support. And over the last 4 years, I have learned so much. I've learned a lot about history. I've learned about history of policing and the history of colonization and the history of white supremacy and the history of Black resistance and Indigenous resistance. I've learned about social movements and how they can come together and how they can strengthen and how they can grow. I've learned so much from my peers and from people who are younger than me. And I've learned a lot through social media. I've learned a lot in spaces where traditional media avoids and tries to silence. And all of this information that has been moving through me personally has changed my consciousness. It's changed my sense of values. It's changed the way that I want to relate to myself as a human being. It's changed how I want to relate to my actions and behaviors and decisions and how I speak and conduct my relationships. It's changed the way that I orient to labor and to work. It's changed the ways that I am going to engage in activism. What has it changed for you? I want to invite you to really allow yourself to be moved this Virgo season, to feel into the ways that change is shaping you, and then to meditate with the sensations in your body mind that are bringing you wisdom and intelligence. And so again, our bodies know. Our bodies know. Our bodies know what is right and what is wrong. I don't think it's actually that complicated. Our bodies, if we are not looking through the lens of national identities or racial politics or something like that, if we are just observing bodies and being with Earth, our bodies know that violence is scary, that people need food, that people need care. Through our mirror neurons, we respond to one another. Our bodies have naturally ingrained consciousness through all of our systems that know how to care. Now, have we been numbed? Yes. Have we disassociated? Absolutely. Have we been manipulated by violence? Definitely. Are people checked out? For sure. Can ego distort what our bodies are experiencing? Yes. And so this is where we also need discernment. And so my question for you in this Virgo season is, how are you being moved? And then can you take some time with what is moving through you to feel into your right course of action? Because this is a time that is asking for action. We are experiencing a crisis of consciousness. And now through next June, a lot of changes are going to happen. Saturn and Jupiter, again, are considered the timekeepers. Some astrologers will talk about them as the social planets or the bridge planets between the inner, the personal planets, and the outer and the transpersonal planets. They represent how the consciousness of the times is evolving, what religions and philosophies and trends are doing to the collective mind. And as we change in our consciousness, we shape the matter, the material realms. As our consciousness shifts, we enact policy. As our consciousness shifts, we build structures, we form relationships, etc. So this is a time to enact change. This is a time to enact it in your personal life. And this is absolutely a time to practice collectivism, solidarity, and mutual aid, and to lend your efforts inside of groups and organizations and networks that are working towards change in practical, material ways. That means actually doing something, not just talking about it, not just feeling about it, not just thinking about it, though talking and feeling and thinking are very much a part of what will move change. And so if part of what you're doing is holding discussion groups and grief circles and offering astrology readings where you're encouraging people to reflect on things, that's absolutely important. And also, this is a great time to involve yourself in movements that can really affect tangible change, such as the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement, getting involved with political parties like Working Families or the Uncommitted movement, putting your labor into regeneration projects for Earth or for particular communities that you might be involved with and care for, etc. There are so many ways to lend your labor. Okay, so where should we go from here? So we started with this T-square. I've talked about Saturn in Pisces. Neptune is here. I'll just briefly say that as we get into 2025 and 2026, Saturn and Neptune are going to be conjunct at the very first degree of Aries. And this conjunction will perfect by early 2026. Many astrologers will read this as a new dream of what life is all about and a new possibility for humanity, especially because at that point, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction will be sextiling Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius. Uranus has almost made its ingress into Gemini. This will happen next year. And Pluto has been making its way into Aquarius. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. But I'll finish this thought and say by 2026, we are entering a new chapter when it comes to astrological symbolism. And you might want to think about that in timing for yourself. And this is a time, again, to put it into action, get your rear in gear, walk your talk, etc., and really focus on what your body and your heart know is true, what you know serves life, what you know brings vitality, what you know will contribute to healing and repair. No action is too small. And one of the main lessons of Virgo is that actions, when they are repetitive, are cumulative, and they build residue. They build patterns in our bodies. So the action of numbing and not really doing anything, if we do that every day, will become a pattern in our body. If we build practices every single day of tuning in some way, of orienting ourselves towards meaningful behavior and action, towards care of our bodies, care of one another, etc., over time, that will build. And what we do now will affect the future. And what we don't do now will affect the future. So this is the crisis of consciousness. What are we building? And what we build now will have a lot of impact for the future. Oh, I'll say one more thing about the Saturn-Jupiter situation. So every 20 years they come together, but because of their synodic cycles, these 20-year increments will happen in signs of the same element for about 200 years, with a little bit of variation at either end of those 2 centuries. We are currently in a time when the chronocrators have just moved in their cycle into air. Their first conjunction was in 1980 in Libra. This was, amongst many things, the time when the internet was birthed into the world. They had a conjunction in Earth in the sign Taurus in 2000. And then in 2020, their conjunction was at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And now until, I believe, the 2200s, their ongoing conjunctions will be in the air element. So again, this is beyond our lifetimes. We are all part of the flow of evolution here on Earth. Can you remember 2.5 days ago? I barely can. 250 million years is how long we've been evolving. We'll see how long we continue to evolve, but what we do now might really shape evolution for the future. So think about what you want to give to the beings who will live here in the 2200s. Earth will still be here, even though you won't be and I won't be, and maybe humanity as a whole won't be. But what can we infuse in the space that can shape the space at that time in ways that resonate with the truth of our hearts and bodies now? So let me let this lead into Pluto's position in Aquarius. So Pluto is currently retrograde. It's at the very first degree of Aquarius. This is the site of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020. Over the course of Virgo season, Pluto will actually return to Capricorn. Pluto retrogrades into Capricorn on September 1st. This is the day before the Virgo new moon. And it will remain in Capricorn until the end of November. It stations direct October 12th, and it will leave Capricorn on November 20th, coming back into Aquarius, where then it will transit until the 2040s, so the next 20 years or so. Pluto is another kind of timekeeper, and when we study astrology through the lens of historical time, the transits of Pluto are really profound to note. So it's been now 16 years or so that Pluto has been in Capricorn. Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008. I started the Embodied Astrology podcast in 2014. So the entire time this project has been going, Pluto has been in Capricorn. And if you have been listening throughout that time, thank you. And some of you might remember several episodes where Pluto in Capricorn has been the main theme, particularly the episode that came out in December of 2020, right before the conjunction Breakdown to Breakthrough was one of the longest episodes I ever did, where I kind of cataloged some of the history of Pluto and Capricorn cycles. And when you follow this cycle back through time, you'll find periods of time when the kind of energy pattern of Capricorn, as it can represent itself through the structures that have been built by dominant power, have been infused by the transformative force of Pluto, and particularly infused by the aspects of Pluto that connect with the symbolism of the god of death, and bring us into what I'll say is like the repressed shadow of the psyche. And so the parts of human consciousness that are thwarted and manipulative, that produce death rather than life, that eroticize violence, etc. Very much Pluto symbolism. Now, I'll also say that all planetary signatures are a spectrum. And so while on the one hand, Pluto might represent death forces and the repressed shadow and unprocessed psyche, and then what emerges from those spaces, on the other side of Pluto, we have transformative alchemy. And we also have cycles of regeneration and rebirth. And in order to regenerate, something also has to go underground for a while. Over Pluto's last transit through Capricorn, or the one that we're just finishing, which is the only one that you or I will ever live through. During this time as a practicing astrologer, I have really noticed that this has been a period of re-emergence and regeneration of indigenous knowledges and practices. And so Capricorn, on the one hand, can definitely represent structural dominance, and Capricorn keywords are associated with some of what I was just talking about a moment ago, like police or prisons or the bureaucratic forces that enact oppression. But Capricorn, in a more ancient symbolism, connects us with the wisdom of the elders and earth-based wisdom and the attunement through our body minds to the cycles of life and death, and the collection and inheritance of knowledge as it is passed through generations. I forget the exact percentage, but the majority of thriving biodiverse ecology at this point on planet Earth is tended by Indigenous people and maintained by Indigenous people, though it is constantly under threat and being eliminated day by day because of, I'm going to say, like shadow forces of Capricorn. Again, that kind of bureaucratic structure of oppression. But over these last 16 years or so, since 2008, there has been a really powerful reemergence and reawakening of land-based knowledge practices and a reclamation of Indigenous knowledge practices. And that includes people from everywhere, because no matter who you are connected through some kind of line to people who were indigenous to a place, and therefore connected to the intelligence of the land and to the ones who grew and were part of the land, to the healing practices, of the environment there, to the ways that time was tracked and agriculture was tended, to the pantheonic and earth-based gods and deities that at some point all of our ancestors were connected with. And so this has also been a time of, I think, a big transformation in terms of how we might feel ourselves connected with wisdom. However, again, a digression. These transits of Pluto through Capricorn, when we trace them through histories of colonialism and imperialism, connect us with cycles of time when the enactment of oppression has been acute and enormous. So the last cycle of Pluto in Capricorn brought us the incorporation of the United States and the signing of the Declaration of Independence, which itself was stolen content appropriated from the Haudenosaunee people, and cited or not cited, used without reference by the founding fathers or whatever, to imagine a place where all men are free, which was always a myth. And that myth was meant to uphold the dominance and power of a very few men. A previous Pluto cycle to that, we have the beginning voyages of the transatlantic slave trade and kind of massive expansion of the colonial project into what are now called the Americas. And a previous Pluto cycle to that, we have the entrapment movement in Europe and basically the beginnings of colonization of the commons, or the taking of private property to be exploited and used by the wealthy, and also the commodification and theft of human labor. So as the commons were seized, as people who had lived on land forever and never had to pay to live somewhere, suddenly were at the mercy of wealthy landlords and landholders. They were forced to move to urban centers, and then their labor was extracted, and labor and land and resource were starting to generate capital and wealth for the elite. This was also during a time when colonization of the Indian continent was underway, and kind of consolidation of European supremacy. At that point, this is like pre-racial concept, but the idea of like Northern Hemisphere supremacy and certainly Christian supremacy was really starting to take root as a driving force of colonial efforts. So that's interesting, just following astrology through cycles of history. Now, Pluto is coming back into Capricorn for just a little while, and I'll talk about this last visit into Capricorn in a moment. But first, as long as we're on cycles of history, I'll say that the cycle of Pluto in Aquarius has already begun. And this is a cycle, again, that will bring us into the 2040s. And when you look back at the cycles of Pluto in Aquarius, you'll find responses to the Pluto in Capricorn cycles. And so Pluto in Aquarius cycles exhibit revolution and resistance. And they show the ways that the people push back, or the proletariat push back against dominant power, and particularly the power of the elite and the power of those who hoard wealth, and the power of those who have consolidated the notion of power around their bodily identities, and thus forth. So it's pretty fascinating to just sit back, like get your popcorn. If I feel like a lot of astrologers are like this, things will happen and we don't like them personally. And it's like, oh my God, I really wish this wasn't happening. This is terrible. But at the same time, because we're astrologers, we're like eating our popcorn, you know, and like, whoa, astrology works. This is amazing just to watch this like clockwork. So pay attention for yourself. I want to just give a shout out to my colleague, Ramon Parrish, who is enthusiastic about studying generational cycles of astrology. He's been a guest on the astrology podcast several times. And his first appearance was during this time, I think in 2020. And we were looking back at cycles of Pluto particularly. All right, so Pluto will return to Capricorn on September 1st, and it will be there just for about 2.5 months, only at the very last degree of Capricorn, which is considered the anaretic degree. This is a degree of affliction and a degree where it's like you're pressed to do all the things before something changes. Pluto and Neptune are in an ongoing sextile. You can see that Neptune is also at the anaretic degree of Pisces. And it will go back, I think, to about 27 degrees this year before ingressing Aries next year. And so Pluto and Neptune are working together to really bring us to the end of an era, to the end of a particular age of consciousness and manifestation. So I'd love to encourage you to learn astrology, to know where Pluto is in your chart, and to consider what wants to get finished up in this part of your chart so that you can enter into the new cycle of Pluto in Aquarius. I will offer you my opinion and interpretation if you want it. In your 2024 Embodied Astrology Year Ahead reading. This was a big theme for all the signs. And you can find those readings at embodiedastrology.com. They are discounted now as we are in the second half of the year, but they still have tons of information in them, and they'll tell you a lot about Pluto cycles. All right. So the last thing that I'll say about this particular setup here is that as Pluto is in Aquarius, as we move into Virgo season, and Pluto and Neptune are sextile, and they're both sending what are called inconjunct or quincunx aspects to the sun as it enters Neptune. They form what's called a yod. Now, the inconjunct aspect is sometimes a little strange when we feel it. And Hellenistic astrologers call this aspect an aversion or aversive aspect. They say that the planetary bodies, or in this case, the luminary and the planet, cannot perceive each other. They can't see each other clearly. And that changes, however, when you have a yod. So when you have two inconjuncts pointing at the same focal body, then the focal body can do nothing but respond and notice these influences. In the Embodied Astrology practice space called Tea Time, where we meet once a month to just talk about astrology and compare notes and see how everybody is doing with it, a lot of participants over the last few years have talked about yods feeling pretty kinky. And I really like this description personally because I think it gives us access to empowerment and a way to play with energies that might feel scary and uncomfortable and painful, but also could be very generative and liberating and help us to access our power and our desire. And so with the sun moving into Virgo, receiving yods from Pluto and Neptune, I want to say that this is a period of time, again, to enact change and also to really clue into the ways that we can be kinksters in the system, right? Like, how can you betray white supremacy today? How can you throw a wrench into the gears of capitalism? And could you do it in ways that are sexy and fun and energizing. And I think that this is a great era for that. And Pluto in Aquarius is already giving, because there is a kind of attitude to the current moment that feels like it has a great sense of humor, that feels like a lot of the younger generation, Gen Z and millennials and exennials like me, are kind of feeling like this is what we've arrived for. This is what we've come for. And in some ways it's different, than I was referencing the 1968 Democratic National Convention. In some ways it's different in the sense that none of us have, well, I can't say that. I can say that for the majority of the people that I know, we've all been raised with the awareness that we might not have a future. So we've all been raised with the awareness that Earth might not exist in the same way when we, reach whatever age. This is becoming increasingly true, right? The dream of having some kind of quote unquote stability, whether it's economic stability or housing stability, or stability in a career or something like that, is pretty much dissolved, I think, for a lot of us. And so there is a kind of radicalization that is and has been happening, where I think a lot of us feel like there's nothing really to lose and there is a lot to be gained by pushing towards change. And though it might be scary, though it might result in profound discomfort and loss of certain kinds of temporary stability, in a long-term way, many of us would rather invest in the kinds of changes that we believe in than attempt to cling to a notion of stability that, I'm just going to borrow a term I heard from Bayo Akamalafe, this idea of, white stability, or stability of the dominant class or caste systems, that so many of us have been entrained to work for a kind of stability that requires instability of others, to work for stability that asserts itself through consumption of resource upon the extraction or exploitation of other beings. And that kind of stability, the safety, the quote unquote safety and security that is the fantasy of police violence and military violence, right? Oh, if we murder all of these people, if we slaughter their children, we'll definitely be safe from them in the future. Like, it's totally delusional. The only thing that you're doing is breeding hatred and contempt and desire for vengeance, right? Like, you're not creating safety for yourself. These notions are wildly unstable. They require increasing amounts of fortification and rigidity in order to maintain themselves. I think a lot of what's happening inside of collective consciousness is this recognition and remembering that the most access we can have to a kind of stability that would actually allow us to thrive is the stability of well relations. So if we have secure attachment systems, maybe, we can have a kind of production of relational and familial stability that can then allow for resource stability, that can then allow for a kind of building of structure or civilization that would in turn be of service to us. So cyclical stability, I'm going to say collective economics, not the economics of death. And as Pluto finishes its transit of Capricorn, it is increasingly clear and apparent to so many people that the violences that many folks are really feeling that they need to fight against, whether this is the violence against birthing bodies, or the violence against queer and trans bodies, or the violence against Palestinian bodies, or the violence against indigenous bodies, or the violence against Black bodies, or the violence against the bodies of the earth, or the violence against bodies of poor people, or the violence against the bodies of the more than human realm. folks are connecting all of the pieces. None of them are actually separate from one another. And there are mechanisms in place to enforce the idea in our collective consciousness that these issues are disparate. And there are mechanisms in place to keep us distracted by needing to put out a fire over there and then respond to that threat over here. And those mechanisms will continue to divide and separate us until we recognize how they're all part of the same thing. So as we're headed into Virgo season, and especially for anyone else here in the so-called United States on Turtle Island, and we are approaching the 2024 general election, many of us are well aware that the illusion of choice between blue and red or Democrat and Republican is a fabricated myth. That these two parties both uphold systems of supremacy. They both fund war. They both invest in expansion of the prison system and police state. They're both invested in maintaining wealth for the elite. Just saw an article the other day about how private prisons are threatening to sue states because lower levels of crime are not producing enough inmates for them to make money, right? So the expansion of the prison system is part of a strategy. It's part of a structural strategy that we can imagine through the evolution of Pluto and Capricorn, that this is the same strategy that was infused into chattel slavery. And it's the same strategy infused into land theft and indigenous erasure and genocide. And this is the strategy of producing expendable human labor. This is the strategy of criminalizing people for existing, whether you're in melanated skin suit or experiencing homelessness or experiencing dependency upon substances in order to make your existence feel a little less harsh. There are so many ways that we can be criminalized. You can be criminalized for trying to have sovereignty inside your own body and reproductive experience. And once you're criminalized, you're sent into a system where your labor, your energy, your money then gets siphoned into the state, and it continues to produce wealth for a top percentage. And as I think we're about to see over the next coming years, and maybe this as we get into Jupiter opposing Saturn, or 16 years from now when Jupiter and Saturn come back together. Over this next little bit, all these pieces are going to start to come together dramatically and profoundly inside of consciousness. And as they come together, bodies of all kinds, I think, have the opportunity to work in mutuality and solidarity and to support one another in our aims for liberation, for peace, for sustainability, and a return to a kind of cyclical stability that Capricorn and Aquarius, I think, in their deepest intelligence, really want to teach us about. That, again, when we tend our lives, when we tend one another, we are tending that which will help us to thrive in more consistent ways. So I'll stop sharing this chart, and then I'm going to share one more image with you. We'll let this close us out with Virgo season. All right, so this is a map. As an embodied astrologer, I love to draw, and I think that not only relying on digital image and computer programs to connect with astrology, but actually really trying to tune in again with my body, with my felt sense, with the environment, and also with creative interpretation, whether that is through astro drama or movement practices or drawing or creative writing or something like that really helps me kind of get the feel of astrology. It helps make the meaning that's meaningful for me. So I want to share this with you as a kind of visual map for Virgo season. So I'm going to go through Virgo season in cycles of time. They're going to be a little irregular. I'm not following calendar weeks per se. I'm just looking at movements. So we enter into Virgo season the day that Venus in Virgo squares Mars in Gemini. And remember that Mercury is the ruler of both Virgo and Gemini. As Venus squares Mars, the feeling here that I have is that care for our bodies produces well-being in our minds, and that action in our consciousness can support well-being in our bodies. Again, I'll just give testimony from the last year and a half of doing somatic space, that having regular practices of self-touch, healing touch, which is one of the main things that we do in somatic space, is use our hands and our breath and our consciousness to bring love and care into our bodies. That this has resulted in me consistently feeling more mentally and emotionally stable, feeling that I have more access to my embodied intuition, being in a better mood, and generally being more able to practice discernment and responsiveness in ways that are caring for myself and others. So Venus and Virgo square to Mars and Gemini, use your mind to affect your actions. This is a major theme for Virgo season. Now, again, both Virgo and Gemini are ruled by Mercury. And as you can see, the second day of Virgo season, Mercury makes a trine to Chiron in Aries. Mercury is retrograde in Leo. Both Aries and Leo are in the fire element. So here we have fire feeding fire. And then if you follow this little orange and red squiggly line, you'll see that a little while later on September 2nd, Mercury also makes a trine to Chiron. So the reason that this happens 2 times is because Mercury is stationing direct on August 28th. So it happens 2 times in Virgo season. We had another trine with Chiron in Leo season. So Mercury in Leo, again, is bringing coherence into our central spaces, our most personal spaces of self-actualization. Leo rules the heart and the spine. It is connected to the possibilities that we have for individual awakening and embodiment. How are you going to be yourself in your one and precious life? You know what it is to struggle against conformity and oppression and other people's projections about who you are. You know the experience of not being seen or witnessed or celebrated for your uniqueness or your specialness. You know what it feels like to be seen. You know what it feels like when you are authentic and courageous and living from your heart. Now, all of us have Leo in our charts, and all of us have hearts in our bodies that are beating, and all of us have a sense of center. All of us are here in our individuated bodies for very unique lives. As similar as they may be in certain ways, they are also totally unique. And it's up to each of us to be ourselves here while we can. And when individuals can actualize, when they can express themselves authentically, and this is from the heart, not from the ego, from the heart. Expressing from the heart requires courage. The root word of courage is cœur, the heart. To be of the heart requires boldness, tenacity, bravery, and these are Leo qualities. Chiron in Aries is a generational transit. Chiron has a 50-year orbit around the sun. I mentioned that Chiron was in Aries in the late 60s. As a current transit, one of the ways that I and probably many other astrologers connect with this symbol is as the woundedness of the ego, and particularly the woundedness of the separated or isolated sense of self, and how that woundedness manifests through competition, through mistrust, through systems of dominance, violence, and behaviors that will reinforce our isolation and loneliness, and then what we might do as reactivity around isolation and loneliness. Now, Chiron also represents a healing journey, and the ways that each of us have inherited wound material from our ancestors that then we can learn about and transform and heal inside of ourselves, so that then we can become teachers and healers for others and in our world. So I'm going to read this aspect here as the reflective remembering, Mercury is retrograde, of the sources of pain of individualism and isolation, and the need to heal in our hearts the ways that we have internalized the ideas that supremacy culture has infused into our consciousness. Now, on the same day that Mercury is trine Chiron, Mars will sextile Mercury, and then the next day Mars will sextile Chiron. So Mars is the ruler of Aries. This is where Chiron is hanging out right now. Mars is currently in Gemini, which is Mercury's sign. So we have a little interesting kind of conversation that's happening here. And again, to go back to this initial impulse of Virgo season, I feel that here we definitely have support for using our minds and using our consciousness to do the work of healing, and to do the kinds of work for healing that are intergenerational in their nature and scope. And so we might be particularly attuned to the ways that wound patterns manifest across time and space, the ways that we may have inherited wound patterns through our upbringings and personal experiences, and the ways that we can address our wound patterns as we've internalized them through experiences of separation, isolation, and individualism, healing in relationship and in connection with others. So these are great aspects, again, to connect in mutual aid and solidarity, to share stories, to hold space for one another, to ask for space to be held for you. Mars and Gemini, sextile Mercury and Chiron would love to share some stories, I think. And this is a powerful time, again, for understanding how many of our struggles are actually totally connected when we get to their roots and their core. And it might seem on the surface that groups of people or certain identities are totally divided and pitted against one another. But if we do some digging, a lot of times we're going to find that the source of our pain leads to the same root. And so when we find that common root, we can understand that we aren't actually against each other. We're against a different kind of enemy. Example is how, again, like the construction of race over the last several centuries has pitted people against each other who are more or less melanated and who may or may not, identify around their racial categories. But that inside of the identification of racial categories, there has been a distraction from the cause of suffering and violence that affects both, non-melanated and melanated people, which is the hoarding of wealth and the ways that systems of supremacy continue to enact violence upon people in general. And that violence is not always equal in its measure and implementation, but it's violence nonetheless. And it will manifest in different ways and contribute to suffering in different ways. And so these aspects to me feel very, very powerful for recognizing where the roots of our suffering are entangled together and joining forces in mutual aid and solidarity in efforts to co-learn and co-educate, so that we can understand what we are in resistance to and also what we're in advocacy of more thoroughly. So you can see that Mercury is preparing to station direct, and Mercury will station direct on August 28th. As Mercury stations direct, Venus is finishing up its transit of Virgo, and the next day Venus will ingress its domicile sign of Libra. Before Venus finishes its transit of Virgo, it's going to come into contact with the outer planets. So we have Venus forming a trine to Uranus and Taurus, opposing Neptune and Pisces, and then right before it ingresses Libra, right after it ingresses Libra, forming a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. So Venus corresponds with our values and our sense of bodily intelligence and need, the ways that we act and react to attraction and aversion, and how we meet our basic needs and what actually our basic needs are beyond the ones that we all share for food and shelter, etc. Everyone has other basic needs that are really basic to you. And your Venus placement will tell you a lot about what those needs are. So as Mercury stations direct, we have Venus aspecting the outer planets. And this to me feels like some potent aha energy, like, wow, okay, this is what I value. This is what is important to me. This is what I need to invest in. This is the kind of care that I need. This is what I'm attracted to. That feels aversive. And then consciousness through our hearts and our spines, coming into our central channel about how we want to move forward. And so Mercury is stationing direct at the end of August. And then over the course of the next couple of days, Venus enters its home sign Libra. It trines Pluto in Aquarius. This feels to me like coherence, coming towards a greater consciousness of what we do want to transform, again, in the air element. And then we'll reach the Virgo new moon. So the Virgo new moon perfects on September 2nd. And this is a new moon that is applying in opposition to Saturn and separating from a trine to Ceres. So Saturn is in Pisces and Ceres is in Capricorn. This new moon to me feels really practical. It feels like a time to get to work. It feels sobering in its influence, and it is asking for tangible and direct action. The day of the new moon, we also have Uranus stationing retrograde in Taurus, and we have Pluto retrograding back into Capricorn, again, where it will be for a couple of months. It's stationing direct in mid-October and leaving Capricorn by the end of November. And so this is your transition notice. From the beginning of September till basically the end of November, this is a great time to consolidate your efforts. If there are ways that you are consciously trying to make a transition, and I would definitely urge you to think about the earth element in your chart, particularly Capricorn and your Capricorn placement, but also Taurus, where Uranus is stationing retrograde, and Virgo. What are the earth signs doing in your chart? And in the earth triplicity, I'm going to guess that you are ready for a new experience and that you have been actively engaged in manifesting and creating a new experience, and that the experience of your life and you being an individual that's part of a collective moment in time, the experience of your life has been readying you for this change for quite some time. You've been in some kind of process of transformation, and now that process is almost complete. So again, if you want more information for your signs, check out your 2024 year ahead readings, and I'll give you a lot more data on that. Now, I also want to say that around this time on September 1st, so the day before the new moon, you might want to tune in with Sherry Taylor. one of the facilitators at Embodied Astrology, who will be holding a release session for her devotional cycle that started on August 18th with a council session with the astrologer Anders Renee. Sherry and Anders collaborated on August 18th to bring us a transmission around listening to your inner oracle. Anders is a vocational astrologer, and Sherry is a death doula, a grief mentor, a psychologist, and also a really amazing astrologer and totally nerdy researcher. She gets into so many different threads of mythology and science and stories from all over the world, different cosmologies. And she is working very deeply over the course of this year, last year, and into next year with the symbol of Saturn in Pisces. Sherry's also, I forget how many planets Sherry has in Virgo, but lots of Virgo energy, Virgo rising. And so I have no doubt that whatever Sherry brings through on the 1st will be totally in service to the influences of this time. And if you have any kind of longing to tap in with astrological symbolism to help you orient in your vocation, in your action, and through your body oracle around how you want to be participating with this moment of need for tangible action and transformative effort, I would highly suggest that you sign up for Sherry's devotional cycle. Sherry has 3-part devotional cycles, and to get into the release session, I don't know what she'll be doing on September 1st, but many of her release sessions involve breath work and some kind of journeying. You would want to also tune in with the council session recording. Okay, so moving into September, between the new moon and the sun's opposition to Saturn, so this is an applying aspect, a growing kind of energy. We also have Mercury's 3rd and last trine to Chiron, second time in Virgo season. Then we have Mercury squaring Uranus in Taurus. And the day after the Saturn opposition, we have Mercury now entering its earthly home, Virgo. So leading up to the Sun-Saturn opposition, we have the ruler of Virgo, the mind of the earth, continuing in this healing process with the new moon, a recognition of, again, tangible action. This is how I want to connect myself to the past and to the future. Chiron is a generational symbol. It's asking us to engage the work of the healing journey. And then Mercury is squaring Uranus the day before Sun, Saturn are conjunct. And I want to say that this feels a little tenuous here. A Sun-Saturn opposition can sometimes be kind of a thwarting energy. It could feel hard to move, but it also feels like with Virgo's ruler Mercury squaring Uranus, that this is a period of time when we might actually be very fortified in our consciousness and determination to work towards meaningful change. At this particular time, on the 7th of September, when the sun is opposing Saturn, we'll also have a workshop with GABS 404 called the Nebula Lab. And over the course of this year, GABS is working with Embodied Astrology to explore the relationship of Neptune in Pisces and also de facto Saturn in Pisces, since Neptune and Saturn are cohabiting the space. But these planetary symbols, as they have to do with the construction of our perceptions of reality. On the 7th, GABS will be focusing on artificial intelligence. And I think that this is kind of an interesting aspect where Mercury is squaring Uranus and the sun opposing Saturn. To me feels like a call to really tune in with your organic intelligence. But because so much of our media is fabricated and will increasingly be manipulated by AI, and AI, I think, has a lot of very interesting potentials. it's a cool moment to feel into some of the ways that we might work creatively with AI and connect AI to also astrological timing and signature. Um, Learning from Gabs in the Nebula Lab has been really fun. For those of you who are interested in the medium of photography and also working with digital manipulation and image editing and storytelling and doing it through a lens of astrology, it's a very fun space to be a part of. You can just come for a drop-in with the Nebula Lab, or you can sign up for the whole series and get access to previous sessions. The last one, I was really happy to co-host with Gabs, and I give a presentation on working with Neptune in your birth chart. Ramon Parrish has also been a guest, and he did a whole session, again, on generational timing with Neptune. So if you're interested in learning more about Neptune as an outer planet, check out the Nebula Lab. The last thing I'll say about this week is that as Venus moves into Libra, it's going to conjunct with the South Node and therefore oppose the North Node. And just a day or two after, we have Mars entering Cancer. Cancer, Libra, and Aries, where Chiron is, are all what are considered to be cardinal signs. Cardinality initiates movement. The nodal axis is an important axis of evolutionary growth, and one that is about to get very stimulated as we get into the end of Virgo season, because the nodal axis has signification around eclipses. So the South and the North Node represent the points of the orbital circuit that the moon makes around the Earth. And the alignment of Earth, Moon, and Sun are what produce eclipses. And we'll have an eclipse on September 17th that I'll talk about in a few moments. But Venus conjoining the South Node and opposing the North Node right after the new moon as we lead towards the full moon eclipse, to me feels very activating. Mars moving into Cancer. Cancer is a water sign. Pisces, where the full moon will be, is also a water sign. Also feels very activating. And then again, this cardinality coming in. Capricorn is a cardinal sign. Pluto will return to Capricorn. Really helps us, again, to take action. And these particular signatures, I think, really help activate our engagement with what we care about and our instincts to protect what needs protection, what is vulnerable and fragile, and also to work towards justice and to work towards methods of justice that are healing and transformative. After the Sun opposes Saturn, the vibe starts to shift considerably. I think that this first chunk of Virgo season, from basically the beginning until the Sun-Saturn opposition, there's a kind of building, mounting energy. I feel this season as quite energizing. I think it's bringing in a lot of information and asking, again, for tangible change. But until we get to the Sun-Saturn opposition and into the space between the new moon and the full moon, the ways that we're orienting towards change may be more conceptual than material. But then as Mercury comes into Virgo, we get into the time for material enactment. So as I mentioned a while ago, one of the big kind of suggestions that I have is to move slowly, to move with discernment, to take your time, to feel things out, and to really listen to the intelligence of your body, mind, and heart. And I would say this especially for this period of time between Mercury's two trines with Chiron, from the beginning of Virgo season through the Virgo new moon. But then as we move out of the new moon, and then definitely as we move past the Sun-Saturn opposition, it's time to begin implementing these new patterns of behavior. Mercury coming into Virgo during Virgo season as the Sun is separating from its opposition with Saturn really wants to get to work. So this is a great time to reinforce habits that you want to strengthen. It's a great time to clean up, literally and metaphorically. It's a great time to tend to care practices, healing practices, to also practice measures of reasonable austerity. Virgo wants to simplify and make things more refined, coherent, and concise. So let Virgo's influence help you to pare down what is unnecessary and superfluous and focus intently on what it is that you are wanting to work towards. Now, the last 10 days or so of Virgo season brings in the big wave of change energy that will take us into Libra season. So from the sun's square to Jupiter on September 12th through until the sun's ingress into Libra, we are definitely working with eclipse energy in the eclipse window. We have the full moon in Pisces, which is a lunar eclipse happening on September 17th. This is the first eclipse in a series of eclipses that will happen in Virgo and Pisces season from now through 2027. So pay attention to the Virgo Pisces axis in your chart. We currently have the north node, or the ascending point of the moon, in Pisces, and the south node, or the descending point of the moon's orbit, traveling into Virgo. And so in the Virgo places of our charts, we want to work to incorporate past lessons and experience to help us move towards the Pisces placements in our charts. The Virgo placements suggest releasing, shedding, and clarifying, while the Pisces placements ask for growth and concentration, evolution, and new experiences. In our lives and in the collective, I'm going to say that this is a period of time that is asking for increased empathy, sensitivity, and awareness of our interrelationships and interconnections. This is a period of time that will enforce consciousness of environmental interrelatedness as the climate demands that we pay attention. This is also a time to work the South Node in Virgo by really addressing internalized mind states of punishment and negation, basically the inner critic voice and the cop inside your head. We want our critical thinking skills to help us discern and be response able. And that means that we do need to understand our impact, or seek to understand our impact. It does mean that we need to be accountable and need to have the capacity to be accountable when we do harm. It does mean that we have to be able to give and receive feedback. But do we need to berate ourselves constantly? No. Do we need to tell ourselves the minute details of every single mistake and where we could have done it better and what was wrong and how we're horrible people? Absolutely not. These kinds of mind states enforce and then reinforce systems of oppression and isolation from one another. When we can do the work of healing justice with ourselves, that's bringing our own behaviors and choices into a larger context of understanding, why did we make that choice? Were we forced to make that choice? Did we make that choice because that is what has been modeled to us, and we didn't even know there was another choice that could have been made until all of a sudden something hurt really bad? Developing a larger context for why harm happens and why we might be engaging in ways with ourselves or one another's that perpetuate harm or violence helps us to do the healing work of it. And so as the South Node in Virgo travels through Virgo, I'm going to say that this is a great time to work skillfully with the inner critic, and also work skillfully with the mind state of like hypercriticism that we can find in culture a lot of the times. We can definitely find it in the experience of cancel culture or something like that. Notice the tendency to tear each other apart, right? Notice the tendency to other one another and to critique each other endlessly for all the different ways that people are not, living up to what you would desire. and hold that expansive framework for others as well as yourself. Why are certain choices being made? What are the perspectives that are coming through? Is your preference a preference, or is it a truth that is shared by many? Are you coming from a place of judgment and punitivity and desire to participate in some kind of vengeance culture? Or are you coming from a place that truly wants healing and repair? Noticing where we are inclined to tear ourselves and one another apart is such important work for the efforts of mutuality and solidarity that we absolutely need to invest in for the foreseeable future. If we want progressive change, if we want a habitable life on planet Earth, we have got to find a way, those of us that want that, to come together across our distances and differences to hear and listen to one another. And we won't be able to hear and listen to one another if our minds are just yelling and completely taking up all the space, belittling and judging ourselves and each other. So, Sun in Virgo square Jupiter in Gemini. Use your mind to affect your body. Tune in with your body to affect your mind. Jupiter in Gemini is considered to be a kind of challenging placement in the sense that Jupiter expands things and Gemini can bring a lot of information and a lot of distractions. Jupiter in Gemini can certainly be a period of time when anxiety is high and overthinking is agitated. Guess what? Your mind and your breath are linked. When you send your breath into your belly for a count of 5, hold it in for a count of 1, and exhale slowly for a count of 10, you will slow your thoughts down. You can use your mind to affect your bodily state. And when we can do that alone and together, we can reduce harm and reactivity, and we can make skillful, discerning choices. So please take the symbol and use your mind to affect your body, and tune in with your body to affect your mind. You can see this shape that I drew around particular aspects, kind of following Venus and Mars aspects here. So the Sun will square Jupiter, Venus will trine Jupiter, Mars will then square the nodal axis where Venus is. And then we're moving towards Venus square to Pluto, eventually at the last degree of Capricorn before Venus's ingress into Scorpio on the first day of Libra season. This last 10 days of Virgo season is a season that is really pushing on us relationally. It is asking us to grow. It's asking us to connect. It's asking us to be curious and to listen. It's asking us to put our sensitivity into action. I love the invitation that I first heard from Resmaa Menakem, that the work of somatic abolitionism requires cultivating a thick skin, a fortified mindset, and a soft and malleable heart. We have to be able to weather the upsetting conditions of activated individuals who are hurt and pissed about a lot of things. We have to be able to not take it personally and not try and control one another. That thick skin is important as we do the work of transformative change and healing justice. Individuals are part of larger collective momentums. We all embody and inherit the harm of our cultures and our ancestors. We all have capacity to awaken to the patterns that move through us and to transform them. But our ability to transform and to heal really requires care and support from one another. It requires the connections that will allow us to regulate and co-regulate together. These are the ways that human beings learn best, in safe and supportive spaces where we are seen, witnessed, and celebrated, and where we are held also in our insecurities and vulnerabilities and helped to address them in meaningful ways. Fortified mindset. This is not going to change entirely to the exact degree of any of our preferences within our lifetimes. We are working in a moment of waves of evolution crashing upon the shore of reality. We've inherited generations and millennia of evolution, and we are shaping the inheritances of the future. So fortified mindset, know what your intentions are. Soft and malleable heart, Mars in Cancer. May we continue to let our hearts be touched by the suffering and struggle that we experience. May we continue to open ourselves in empathy and sensitivity to the struggle of our most vulnerable. And may we move into action to protect what is most vulnerable, the most marginalized populations, the smallest beings, the flora, the fauna, the microscopic beings, and the earth itself. And may we protect one another as if we were family, right? Mars and Cancer squaring the nodes. The last aspect I'm going to talk about is this full moon in Pisces. As I mentioned, this is the first eclipse in a series of eclipses. So we're in eclipse season as we're moving out of Virgo season. There will be a second eclipse on October 2nd in Libra, a solar eclipse there. And so between September 17th and October 2nd, we're in the eclipse window or in the eclipse portal. Now, I personally am very sensitive to eclipse times. My body feels real weird during them. I kind of feel like I'm on psychedelics for a lot of the eclipse time. And it really seems to me that strange things happen. Though some people don't notice them that much, and maybe you won't either. But definitely pay attention to your chart. If you have any placements around the 25th degree of Pisces or in the other mutable signs, this might be a potent lunation for you to be working with. So this eclipse is helping us connect with our creativity and our participation with larger forces and the flow of change. This is an eclipse that is asking us to really tune into the ephemeral, dreamlike nature of life. Life is fleeting, and we are here shaped by ancient and twisted karma, and our work is to awaken. And as we awaken, we participate in co-creating this life dream for ourselves and for others who share this dream with us. As the eclipse axis moves into Virgo and Pisces, it's wobbling pretty profoundly. A lot of times eclipse cycles will overlap with one another. And between now and 2027, we'll have eclipses in Virgo and Pisces season, but we'll also have a couple more in Libra and Aries season. So we'll have a solar eclipse in Libra coming up. But I think we have another one or two eclipses after that, still in the Libra Aries continuum. And then we'll also start to get eclipses in the Leo Aquarius axis towards the end of the Pisces Virgo eclipses. And so this to me feels like a symbol of the kind of collective dream shifting, and therefore the individual bodies changing, and notions of personal experience and interpersonal dynamics really evolving quite rapidly. We are here as members of society, and society has its own consciousness, and that consciousness is not fixed. That consciousness is also evolving. As members of society, we can participate in the evolution of consciousness for the collective. This is a period of time that is engaging mass mobilization of people as the consequences of climate change and supremacist systems of state violence continue to rise in the consciousness of individuals and communities. individuals and communities will be working together to resist and transform what society is doing. So already we're seeing a strengthening of unions and solidarity networks. We're looking at cross-coalition efforts of different groups of people understanding how their struggles are connected. This is the kind of energy, attitude, curiosity, and willpower that will shape change. We will be pressed to change because our world demands it. We'll be pressed to change because there are no other options. So Virgo season, I think, is an invitation to really orient yourself with your focal point. A lot of things might happen in the coming years that you have absolutely no control over. But if you know the truth of your heart and your body, if you know what you are ultimately invested in, and this is a quality of energy that you have access to, this is not some notion of like your dream job or something like that, or what you're going to buy with all the money you make when you get your dream job. Those are phantom fantasies. Orient yourself on what is lasting. What is lasting is the truth of your heart. What is lasting is the integrity and the dignity of your spirit. What is lasting is consciousness. Consciousness is here on earth. It is part of life on earth. It is here without us being aware of it. But when we are aware of consciousness, then we can tap into it. And consciousness builds the material reality. So let this be a time when your consciousness is mutating and transforming in response to what you are picking up in the informational realms of your environment. A couple days before this full moon on the 15th of September, Janata Petrus will lead Artistic Alchemy, which is a monthly gathering for the full moon. These monthly gatherings are meant to support us all in creative reawakening and reclaiming. Janata is an expert in artistry of life. I really love the way that she facilitates. I always feel so invited and taken care of in her spaces. She's Cancer. Shout out to those Virgo Cancer intelligences out there. She's also a Virgo rising, and just has such generosity in the ways that she holds space for creative communion and artistic alchemy. These are spaces to just come attune with your artistry and creative intelligence. You can bring art projects if you want, but this is really a space for feeling into the ways that we can commit ourselves to creative practices. Especially with the Virgo Pisces axis, this is such a big invitation. Pisces is a sign often very much associated with imagination and dreams and artwork in general, particularly the kinds of art that move us and produce transformative experiences. And Virgo is a symbol for the development of craft. So I know that I feel excited about joining Janata in this space. And if you're looking for a little creative hydration, you might join it as well. And then the last little pitch I'll give is for the Jupiter in Gemini research group, which Ramon Parrish and I are co-leading, along with the participants of the group. So we are not the only leaders. It is a participatory research group. It is co-led and co-created. We're just getting going. We started a couple months ago, and we are embarking on a journey that will take us at least until June of next year, if not till maybe February of the following year, actually getting into 2026 in this period of time that I talked about as a new chapter beginning. And we're working together to really study cycles of change and also cycles of consciousness when it comes to organizing activism and movement work, so that we can help produce materials that will support activism and movement work over the course of the next 25 years until 2050. If you are interested in researching history, astrology, and participating with generative progressive change, come join us in the group. It's totally free to participate, and it's completely volunteer run and really fun. And Ramon and I are also co-leading, co-facilitating a on-land retreat in October with Ramon's partner and really brilliant social strategist, Michelle Gabrieloff Parrish. So we're going to hold space at the Eco Dharma Center in the Rocky Mountains in so-called Colorado for 3 days at the end of October, October 24th through 27th. And this is an opportunity for us to work together to build our consciousness through our bodies, through our relationships, and connect with land. And I'm going to share a little bit from Ramon about this event as my sign off. But before I get into that, I want to say that I am grateful to you if you've made it this far in the recording. I hope that anything or everything that I shared with you is at the very least entertaining and hopefully beneficial and useful for your Virgo season. Again, if you want the horoscope or the reading for Virgo season for you as a body being that is not necessarily talking about history or politics or something like that, but really focused on how can you tune in with this energy in your personal life right now through your felt sense, through your consciousness, through your relationships, check out your season ahead horoscope. Those are available wherever you found this transmission. And I hope to see you sometime soon at Embodied Astrology. You can join me again every Monday for Somatic Space or once a month at Astro Tea Time. It's a really fun way to just hear about how astrology is being embodied in different lives. You can also find me at the Jupiter and Gemini Research Group or at the Body of Stars Retreat. And I will leave you with that and welcome Ramon's voice to invite you to the Body of Stars. And I hope to see you there. And if not there, then somewhere else soon. Be well.
The Body of Stars Retreat is an opportunity for the EA community to go beyond meeting in a dispersed fashion over Zoom and to come together in real time, in real space, to step-by-step build up our astrological knowledge, contemplation, creative practice, and activism, and to do so in community with one another, to do so in community with the land, and to do so in communion under the night sky. So it's October 24th through the 27th, and we hope you all join us at the Eco Dharma Retreat Center in the mountains of Colorado.